Hey everyone, Chris here. Welcome back. After a much longer than anticipated hiatus, we are back on the Legend Hobby T-28 Trojan. And there is actually a really awesome reason why it's taking so long. And so I'm actually gonna tell you guys all about it at the end of this video. So make sure that you check that out. But otherwise in this video, we are talking about the landing gear installation. Now I have the Sierra Giant Scale Retracts. They are pneumatic operated, which means they're operated by air. And so also we've got the landing gear doors all working. There's a pretty complex setup for the main gear doors especially. And so we've got that all sorted. And so yeah, I'm super excited to get into it and show you guys the landing gear setup on this big, awesome model. And so yeah, let's get into it. There's a whole lot to cover here. And this is a huge milestone for this project because there's not a whole lot left after this. So let's go. Now, before we get into it, I want to mention this video is brought to you by PCBWay. If you have any kind of maker needs, like if you've got 3D printing or machining, electronics, anything of that sort that needs to be made, they have a huge list of services that they offer that are all related to that. And so if you are doing any kind of design work, they can help you realize those designs. And so be sure to check them out. I've got a link down in the description where you can check out their website, PCBWay.com. And a big thank you to them for their support. Yeah. All right, so our next major milestone is done. All of the landing gear are in, they're working, landing gear doors are functioning as well. Everything is syncing up really, really nice. So I wanted to talk through a little bit how we set this all up. Now I'm using the Sierra Giant Scale pneumatic gear. So they are powered by air. And I also have brakes on the main tires as well. So I went the air route because, you know, for large scale models like this, I've had far better reliability from pneumatic landing gear than I have from electric gear. If you set up the air gear right, man, it's gonna be trouble-free and super reliable, but it takes a little bit to make sure that that happens. And so the Retracts have, you know, barbs on each end of the air cylinder which the airline connect onto. Every single one of those barb connections, I use some 3-in-1 oil. I put it in the airline, pushed the airline onto the barb, and what that oil does is it lubricates the system and it also creates a really nice seal on each of those barbs. And so that's really, really important. If you try and put that stuff on dry, usually it's going to end up leaking. So you want to use 3-in-1 oil on every single one of those connections. Now the other thing is that the Robart system, it's their variable resistor system, so you can set the speed of the gear, which is really nice. And you just adjust those two, there's two screws on the valve that allow you to do that. But I want to mention, you know, whenever you're putting anything into the airframe, you have to avoid any kinks. You can't have any kinks in the airline, otherwise the gear's not going to function right. So if you get everything together and you've got one gear just acting really funny, it's probably because there's a kink in the line somewhere. So, you know, when you're inserting the lines into the wing, especially, you got to make sure that nothing is pinched in there. You can't see it, so the way that you put it in there, just make sure you've got extra, you're not pulling super hard on the airlines as you're pushing the retract into the wing. But otherwise, you know, the nose was super simple to set up. You got two pieces of angle aluminum extrusion that the nose gear mounts into, and so that was really simple to, you just literally bolt those into place on the bulkhead and the firewall and then strap the nose gear onto it. I will say that the Sierra Giant gear are absolutely gorgeous. They are extremely scaled, they look phenomenal, and they work fantastic. You got really smooth operation. There's no leaks whatsoever, and so I'm really happy with the gear. I do want to mention, you have to put quick releases in any connection where you're going to be removing the wings, right? So there's a T in the fuselage, and you got two ends with quick disconnects, so that way you can remove it really easily. But otherwise, there were all Festo fittings that came with the air system. So that, in those cases, you actually don't have to use any oil in there. You can just push them in, but you got to make sure you push them in super tight and you pull on them so they can't pull out. And so those are really even more simple to set up, which is really nice that they have those in there. Setting up an air system, again, is not hard, but you just gotta make sure you follow the instructions, right? You have to have T fittings because you gotta connect things up in parallel. So you have to have T fittings to split off so you've got enough airline to go to the wings and to the nose, right? And so it's just important to understand that you have to have those T's in there, and you're partitioning off lines so you make sure that everything is connected properly. With respect to the gear doors, now they come with the full assortment of gear doors, which is fantastic, the kit does. It is a little bit of a process to get them in place. Now, I started with the main gear, and this is the one nice thing about having the air retracts is that you can test the system with your hand. You can't do that with electric gear. You have to take the motor out in order to test the connections and the doors and whatnot. I started out with putting the top strut door in place and getting that all hinged up and lined up. And so from there, just following the instructions, actually, you put the connector in there and then you connect. There's some push rods and ball joints that you have to create. Now, there are multiple of these brass push rods that are intended to be used for gear doors. And so I ended up using the short one for the strut doors because you really need a short connection to make sure that you don't end up over centering or pulling the door off when it retracts and stuff. That distance between the door and the strut has to be just about perfect. And there is going to be some variability there. So, me giving you a dimension is not really going to be extremely helpful. But what I ended up doing is I took that short one and pushed or screwed the ball link in as far as I could get it because I knew that distance had to be short. The other thing is that the Sierra gear have a coupler on the strut that I was able to rotate as I needed to get the door alignment perfect when it retracts and also to make sure the distance is correct. And so that's another variable that you can change to get that perfect fit. And then once you have that all, it works perfectly. But again, with the air retracts, you can move the thing with your hand, which makes it really easy to test as you go. It's not as easy with the electric gear because you'd have to otherwise remove the electric motor out of it to be able to manually just move the retract up and down. From there, once I had the strut door in place, I went on to the lower wheel door that's also on the strut, and that was pretty fiddly to get in place, I'm not gonna lie. I would recommend, if you have one of these and you're putting it together, doing that alignment with the wings on the fuselage. Don't do that separate because that way you can make sure that door aligns where it's supposed to with the fuselage, because if you don't do that, you're gonna end up having some misalignment, I guarantee you. So have the wings on the fuselage for that lower strut door. And so to set up the inner doors on the mains, there are slots that already exist in the fuselage and in the door itself, so gluing the hinges was really simple. I ended up gluing them into the doors themselves and then using 2 screws so that way I can remove them if I ever need to. You never know if you got to pull those off for whatever reasons, and so it's better to be able to do that with a couple of screws than have to actually cut the hinges or something like that. So they are technically removable if I need them to be, but I want to mention that, make sure that when you're setting those hinges that you get them seated properly so that the door closes nice and flush. Because if the hinge is too low in there or it's too high, you're not going to get a nice flush close. So dry fit everything, make sure that you've got it the way that you want it in terms of the fit, and then go through the process of gluing. Also, make sure as you're gluing that stuff, put some oil in the hinges, or so that way you don't lock them up. So that will avoid that altogether. And I just use CA to glue the hinges, and it holds really well for that stuff. One last thing, there is a third door that I will be adding once the cowl is mounted. And so that we'll be cutting that out of the fiberglass and making that manually in the next video. We need to give you guys a full landing gear cycle, show you how this gear is working with the built-in sequencer. We got the servos and all of the pneumatics working perfectly. So let's check that out. All right, so we've got the landing gear in, the gear doors are functioning perfectly. This is a huge milestone for this project. I'm super excited to finally be getting this model done. There is only one thing left, and that is the engine. And so in our next video, we're going to cover the engine installation. We'll start getting that engine running, broken in, and so that's gonna be amazing. It's gonna sound so awesome. And I do apologize, it's taken as long as it has to get to this point, but there is a really, really good reason. I just published my first book. This is called Mastering the Art of Scale Aircraft Painting and Finishing. And for a limited time, I'm making it available to you for 50% off the cover price. So just head over to www.artofscalemodeling.com. I've got a link down in the description. And so I am super excited to have my first book published, and I might have even published a second one in the process, and this is about cockpit detailing. So you can get both of those at artofscalemodeling.com. I'm so excited to be able to offer these to you guys. It has been quite the process, and so yeah, that is why we had the long stretch in between videos, and so there's so much more on the way with this, and so I can't wait to start getting more of these content out to you guys. But with that being said, guys, that is it for this video. If you would like to see our last video on this T-28, you can see that here. We did all of the servo installation, canopy, pilots, operating pilots, all of that stuff. It's awesome. And so yeah, until our next video, guys, I'll see you at the field.